The steady wail of traffic outside barely registered in Ava Bennett's mind. She sat curled up at the small table by the window of her worn-down New York apartment, city lights bleeding through thin curtains onto her trembling hands. In front of her, a stack of medical bills loomed like a verdict. $38,000, the cost of keeping her mother alive. The strongest woman she had ever known was dying of late-stage cancer, and Ava had nothing left to give but overtime hours, instant noodles, and fragmented sleep. She worked 3 jobs, each one draining the last bit of energy she had. Her main shift in the morning was at Maple and Ink, a quiet, cozy bookstore cafe tucked in a corner of the restless city. It smelled of fresh espresso and old pages, a small reprieve in a world that never slowed down. But peace didn't pay hospital bills. She shoved the papers into her backpack, her nails digging into her palms as if pressing hard enough could keep everything from falling apart. Her morning shift started in less than an hour. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. The face in the mirror reflected sunken eyes, hastily tied hair, and the hardened look of someone too used to survival. Ava had once been a literature major, dreaming of becoming an editor. But dreams didn't last long in a city that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Now, all she had left was reality, a life lived paycheck to paycheck, one shift at a time. At Maple and Ink, she hung up her coat, tied on her apron, and forced a breath through tight lungs. Then she smiled, a rehearsed, mechanical smile, and stepped behind the counter. A new day had begun, though for her the days never truly ended. They just blurred together, a cycle of exhaustion, responsibility, and the fragile hope that someday things might get better. What she didn't know was that morning, between lattes and cappuccinos, fate was about to put a man and an offer in her path that would change everything forever. Maple and Ink welcomed the morning with quiet sunlight streaming through old wooden shelves. Coffee machines hissed softly, sending a wave of warmth and roasted aroma into the air, comforting almost. But not for Ava. She was tired, she was hungry, and all she wanted was to survive another day. She had just finished tying her apron when the bell above the door rang, and then he walked in. Julian Hart, hair neatly styled, a gray tailored suit that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine, cold, unreadable eyes, the kind of man who didn't need to ask permission. He was a regular, always the same, double espresso, no sugar. But never once had he looked at her. Not really. Today he did. Ava felt his gaze settle on her as she picked up the marker to write the name on his cup. "Your name?" she asked, voice steady, like she had practiced it 1,000 times. Julian looked up, eyes slowly sweeping across her face. "Are you new here?" Her smile didn't waver, but it tightened. "No, I've been here 6 months. Maybe you just never noticed." Something flickered in his eyes. Mild surprise, maybe interest. "Then that's my oversight." He pulled out a sleek black card and tapped it without looking at the amount. But instead of turning away, he leaned in slightly. "Take the night off. Have dinner with me." Ava froze. The words landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. Polite, clean, but it wasn't an invitation. It was a test. She pushed his card back toward him, keeping her hands calm even as her stomach twisted. "I don't date customers, Mr. Hart." No anger, no embarrassment, just a lazy smile curling at the corners of his mouth, like he'd heard this line before, and it never mattered. "You know," his eyes dipped briefly to her name tag. "Everything has a price. It's just a matter of the right number." Her breath caught. No yelling, no crude insults. And yet, it stung more than anything ever had. He was watching her closely, like he saw right through her. And worse, like he saw how tired she was, how close to breaking. She set the espresso cup down with a loud clink. "Your coffee's at the end of the bar. Don't come back." But Julian didn't leave right away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small black card, flipped it, and slid it across the counter. Just one line, $500,000, one night. His voice came quiet, deliberate. You look like someone who could use the money. Ava stood frozen. Her heart pounded, her face flushed. Shame, anger, humiliation. She wanted to tear the card apart, scream, tell him to go to hell. But that number, $500,000, lodged itself in her chest like a cruel whisper. She thought of the bills, her mother in that sterile hospital room, the hours she couldn't buy back, and the truth hit her like a punch. No one was coming to save them. Her fingers trembled, and in a moment of reckless instinct, she slipped the card into her apron pocket. Your coffee's at the bar, her voice cracked. No longer cold, just scared. Julian nodded, took the cup, and walked away as if nothing had happened. But Ava stood there, nails digging into the counter, her world spinning. She knew, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The business card in Ava's apron pocket burned all day like a brand. She poured coffee, smiled at customers, repeated names with mechanical rhythm, but inside her mind was locked in a suffocating room where one sentence kept repeating, $500,000 one night. She hated herself for not throwing it away, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. That number, that door, that whispered thought inside her. Just one night, just once. Your mother needs to live. By the time her shift ended, Ava dragged herself home. Her mother was asleep, the oxygen machine hissing gently beside the bed. The room was still, but the silence screamed. Another bill on the table, $4,275 for the next round of testing. No insurance, no backup, no more time. No. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from truth. She had lost, not to Julian, but to reality, to poverty, to the kind of hopelessness that dreams can't outrun. Then she pulled out her phone. Her fingers didn't resist this time. 3 rings. Ava! His voice came calm, composed, dangerously familiar, as if he'd known all along she would call. I hate you, she whispered, like it was her last line of defense. That's okay, Julian said gently. I only need your answer. Silence. Then from a voice that didn't sound like her own, tomorrow night, send me the address. Time became a blur, and suddenly she was standing in front of the Hartmore Hotel, staring up at the cold, glowing glass. The city reflected back at her, dazzling and distant. She wrapped her coat tighter, but nothing could keep out the chill in her chest. The elevator climbed without sound. The doors opened into gold-lit silence. Marble floors, high ceilings, a sweeping view of New York behind floor-to-ceiling windows. And in the center of that luxury, Julian Hart sat with a glass of whiskey, watching her. You're on time, he said. Ava didn't flinch. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. Let's get this over with. Julian stood unhurried. He walked to a nearby table, opened a sleek black briefcase, and pulled out a document. No flourish, no games. A contract, no fine print, no hidden clauses. Just one question. Do you accept the terms, one night, $500,000? Ava took the pen. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the knowledge that after this, there would be no way back. But there was no other way forward either. Without hesitation, she signed. It wasn't just a business deal. It was surrender, a declaration that Ava Bennett, the girl who had fought to stand tall, had finally been broken by the weight of surviving. And yet, in that moment, neither of them realized. This night wouldn't just bind them in a deal. It would ignite something neither of them could control. The next morning, pale light crept through the thick curtains, casting soft streaks across the quiet room. Ava lay still in the unfamiliar bed, feeling like her soul had been peeled away. Everything inside her felt hollow. No anger, no relief, just emptiness. Julian was still asleep beside her, his breathing even, his face relaxed, untouched by what had happened the night before. Ava glanced at him for a second, without feeling, just detachment. This was the man who had paid $500,000 for one night with her, and what unsettled her most was that it had all been so easy. She slipped out of bed silently, pulling on her clothes. No words, no tears. But as she stepped out of that penthouse, walked down the quiet hallway and into the sterile, freezing elevator, Ava knew that something inside her had been lost forever. Her pride, her sense of self, or maybe the version of herself she had been trying to protect all along. She didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain. She was no longer the woman she had been yesterday. 4 days passed like a silent wound that refused to close. Ava returned to Maple and Ink like a ghost. She poured coffee, wiped counters, smiled at customers, all muscle memory. But inside, she felt hollow. She didn't cry. She didn't wait for a call. Julian had vanished, not just from her phone, but from the world, as if that night had never happened. Sometimes, as she stared at the gray light filtering through the cafe windows, she asked herself, would anything be different if I had thrown that card away? If I hadn't made that call? But the worst question was always, why hasn't he said anything? On Thursday morning, while she was bent over cleaning the espresso machine, a voice she didn't want to hear pierced the hum of the cafe. Morning, Ava. She looked up. Mason Grant, Julian's business partner. She'd seen him with Julian a few times, always smirking, always looking like the world was one big game. Thought we should talk about you and Julian, he said, leaning on the counter like it was a casual chat. There's nothing to talk about, Ava replied, cold and flat. Mason didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and placed it in front of her. One glance, 1 second, and Ava's world collapsed. Mason, you bet she'd say yes? Julian, everyone has a price, just a matter of the right number. Mason, 500K? Bold. Julian, watch me. Ava went still. Her hands clenched the rag so tight her knuckles turned white. Each line on the screen cut deeper than the last. She hadn't just been bought, she had been bet on. A bargaining chip, a sick dare between two rich men who saw women like stocks. Things to win. She didn't speak. She just grabbed the phone and walked out. The streets blurred around her. Cars, people, sounds. None of it touched her. Only the rage, the shame, the slow-burning realization that she had been used. She burst into Julian's office like a storm. He looked up and froze. Ava threw the phone onto his desk. The messages lit up the screen. Read it, she said, her voice trembling but razor-sharp. Julian stared. A pause. His jaw tightened. Then, it was a mistake, he said quietly. Ava laughed, and it was the coldest sound in the world. A mistake? She echoed. That wasn't just a deal, Julian. That was a dare, a game, and I was the joke. Julian stood, trying to approach. I didn't mean it like that. No. She stepped back, hand up. Don't lie. You knew what you were doing. You didn't just insult me. You ripped apart everything I had left. You made me a joke. Her voice cracked, tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Did you ever see me as a person, or just another number to prove you could afford anything? His silence said it all. Ava reached into her coat. The check, still folded, still pristine. She threw it on the desk like filth. Take your money, she said, voice breaking, and get the hell out of my life. She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her, but her heart stayed open, bleeding. Behind her, Julian stood still, staring at the check. And for the first time in his life, Julian Hart understood loss, the kind no amount of money could ever buy back. Julian Hart never believed that loss could touch him. He was too used to control of companies, markets, and people. In his world, everything was a transaction, And when the price was high enough, every door eventually opened. But the door Ava closed stayed shut. From the moment she threw that check at him and walked out, Julian was no longer himself. He stood still in his glass-lit office, staring at the paper on the floor as if it were mocking him. He'd once bought entire buildings with a single signature, but being rejected, publicly and coldly, by one woman using his own money against him, that was new. He was used to women agreeing, to flattery, to being chased. But Ava was different, and now she was gone. No words, no goodbye, not even a final glance. That night, for the first time in years, Julian couldn't sleep. He lay in his oversized bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it might hold the answers. Finally, he picked up his phone. Her name was still in his contacts. He dialed, ring, ring, call blocked. He tried texting, bounced back. Julian Hart, the man who had executives waiting months for a meeting, was cut off completely by a girl who had nothing but pride. But he didn't get angry. He didn't reach for power or pride. For the first time, Julian felt small. And in that smallness, he finally saw the man he never wanted to become. The next day, work became background noise. Meetings shortened, emails unanswered, assistants knocked, and he didn't even lift his head. His mind kept returning to one thing: Ava's eyes, not full of rage, but disappointment. Not because she hated him, but because he let her down. And that cut deeper than any corporate loss. Julian didn't call again. He knew. Apologies were cheap now. He had to do something bigger. Days later, he called an emergency board meeting. On the 38th floor of Hartmore Group, he announced all partnerships with Mason Grant were terminated immediately. No press, no announcement, just a single sentence. I won't do business with people who lack integrity. The room went silent. Some objected. He didn't justify. He didn't care. He wasn't doing this for anyone else. He was doing it to find the part of himself he'd lost. Then came something more. Julian created a private, anonymous fund, offering medical treatment grants for patients in need. The first recipient, Ava Bennett's mother. 3 days later, he went to the hospital. No appointment, no grand entrance. Just a man with a signed treatment file, waiting quietly for a doctor to confirm. When Ava entered the room and saw him standing there, both froze. But Julian didn't speak. No apology, no weak smile. Just a look, honest, quiet, and lower than hers. He wasn't there to beg. He was there because he was changing, and he wanted, for once, to be a man worthy of being seen again. Ava stepped into the hospital room, a cup of hot soup in hand. She wasn't expecting anything unusual, just her mother resting as usual. But when the door swung open, Julian Hart was standing there. Her heart sank, like the air had been sucked from the room. He turned slowly, and for once his eyes weren't proud or guarded. They were quiet, almost humble. "What are you doing here?" Ava gripped the cup tighter, her voice sharper than the cold November wind outside. Julian didn't flinch, but he didn't step forward either. He simply stood. "Making sure your mother gets the treatment she needs," he said calmly. "Not because of you, not out of guilt, but because you deserve the help." She scoffed. "I don't need your charity." At that moment, the doctor walked in, holding a thick file, his expression serious but hopeful. "Ava, thanks to an anonymous donation from Hartmore, the program has been expanded. Your mother will continue her treatment, and not just her. 4 additional patients were added to the priority list." Ava turned back to Julian, eyes burning. "You think doing a few good things makes me forget what you did? What you saw me as?" Julian nodded. No defense, no excuses. "No," he said softly. "I didn't do it because you'd forgive me. I did it because, for the first time in my life, I wanted to do the right thing. Not to win you back, not to buy redemption. Just Not to keep being the man I was. Ava had no words. She looked at him, and for the first time there was no calculation, no ownership in his gaze. Just a man trying, not to erase the past, but to rewrite who he would be tomorrow. And in that moment, she knew. He was no longer the Julian Hart from that night. 3 weeks had passed since Ava last saw Julian at the hospital. 3 weeks of silence. No texts, no calls, no unexpected shadows lingering outside Maple and Ink like she once half expected. But his name was everywhere in the headlines. Hartmore Group severs ties with Hale and Grant Investments. Julian Hart restructures internal leadership, shifts focus to humanitarian initiatives. Ava didn't trust media spin. He was too good at controlling narratives. But deep down, she knew what happened at the hospital hadn't been for show. No investor made quiet donations and walked away from credit like that. She had tried to forget him, thrown herself into work, 2 shifts a day, hospital visits, bills piling faster than she could count. But at night, when the city exhaled and the noise died down, his name echoed in her head. Not as the man who had hurt her, but as someone trying to become more. Then one night, at exactly 1:17 a.m., her screen lit up. Julian Hart, unblocked. A message blinked onto the screen, a quiet whisper in the dark. I know I can't change the past, but I'm trying to be a man worthy of forgiveness. If you're willing to listen, meet me. No contracts, no money, just 2 people, and maybe a new beginning. Ava sat on her bed, gripping her phone like it might shatter if she let go. Her heart pounded, not out of affection, but from the sheer weight of what those words carried. Part of her wanted to delete the message. But another part, the part that saw him standing silent at the hospital, the part that heard the doctor talk about anonymous generosity, couldn't look away. She read it 3 times, and each time, it felt different. Finally, her fingers moved slowly across the screen. Tuesday, 8 p.m. Maple and Ink closes at 7. I'll have coffee ready. Message sent. Ava sat there, phone still in hand, not because she was waiting for a reply, but because for the first time in a long time, she had just opened a door she never thought she'd be willing to unlock. As 8 p.m. drew closer, Ava's chest tightened with every passing minute. She didn't quite understand why she had agreed to meet. Part of her still hadn't forgiven him, still remembered every word he said, every cold stare. But another part, the part that had watched him change quietly over the last 3 weeks, wanted to know if it was real. Maple and Ink closed at 7. She cleaned up as usual, but her hands moved slower. When she turned the lights back on over the seating area by the window, she took a deep breath. 2 cups of coffee were already brewing. One for her, one for him. No sugar, no milk. His usual order. She paused, then added a little cream. Not everything has to be exactly the same, she thought. 7:58. Headlights swept across the front glass. Julian stepped out, not in one of his power suits, but in a thick gray coat, hair tousled slightly from the wind. He didn't look around or carry presence. He just arrived. Ava was already seated. Her heart was racing, though her face remained calm. You're early, she said, voice steady but softer than she expected. Julian nodded. I didn't want you to wait. There was no showmanship in his words, just honesty. He sat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. His hands rested on the table, but he didn't reach for the coffee. Didn't look around. He only looked at her. Silence stretched. But it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence 2 people needed when they're learning how to speak without defense. Finally, Julian spoke. I used to think control was strength, that if I controlled people, emotions, I couldn't be hurt. He met her eyes, not with pride, but with humility. You broke that. Ava didn't respond immediately. She stirred her coffee slowly, then said, You made me feel like I was nothing. A price, a bet. Julian nodded. No denial, no excuse. I know, and I'll never forget that. After a long pause, she asked, not angry anymore, just curious. Why did you do all of this? The hospital, my mom, the donation, cutting Mason off. Julian exhaled, his voice lower. Because I couldn't live with the way you looked at me that day. Not because I lost you, but because I hated who I saw in myself. Ava lowered her gaze. Something inside her cracked, just slightly. After a beat, she murmured, just coffee, she whispered. No promises, no past. Julian looked at her, something soft breaking through his silence. Then let's begin. Here. And in that quiet night, in a closed cafe full of second chances, there were no deals, no conditions, only two people, once broken, sitting face to face trying to start again. This time, with who they truly were. After that first quiet meeting, Julian didn't try to win Ava back. No texts, no flowers, no carefully worded apologies. He only did one thing. He showed up, consistently, respectfully, quietly. Each morning when Ava opened Maple and Ink, a cup of coffee sat waiting on the doorstep. No name, no brand. But she knew. Beneath it, always a note. Some handwritten lines, sometimes neat, sometimes rushed. It's cold today. Don't forget your coat. You're doing better than you think. I don't expect you to come back. I just don't want you to feel alone. Ava never responded, but she read them. Every word, every letter, slipped through the cracks she'd sealed shut. In the evenings when she locked up late, Julian would often be there, sitting in the corner with a book. Always the same kind. Quiet literature, no distractions. He never spoke unless she did. When she shut the lights, he'd rise, follow behind at a distance. Never beside her, never ahead, just close enough. Once when she turned around, he was gone. But a note remained on the table. You can step back whenever you need to. I'll still be here, just far enough to catch you if you fall. Ava had once thought Julian Hart only knew how to take, to control. But for 3 weeks, he did nothing but wait and walk. Then came the rain. She had forgotten her umbrella. The downpour started just as she locked the cafe. She was about to run when she saw him, already standing beneath the awning across the street, holding an umbrella. He didn't wave, didn't call, just waited for her to notice. They stood in silence, side by side, beneath the rhythm of falling rain. Ava shivered, not from cold, but from the familiar fear of trusting again. Julian didn't move, and in that quiet, unspoken moment, Ava reached out. She took his hand, not trembling, not unsure, just firm enough to say, I haven't forgiven, but I trust. Julian said nothing. He only closed his fingers gently around hers, just enough to let her know. He wouldn't let go, unless she asked him to. That night they walked home beneath the rain. No hugs, no promises, no confessions, only a hand in a hand and two hearts, finally learning to beat in the same rhythm again. The rain that night wasn't loud or wild. It fell softly, steadily, as if time itself had slowed. Ava and Julian walked side by side beneath a small umbrella, her hand still in his. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. Sometimes silence is the gentlest language two people who've been hurt can offer one another. The mist curled through the quiet spaces between them. The air was damp and cold, pressing against her chest, but she didn't shiver. She wasn't afraid anymore. She didn't pull away. Julian held her hand just firmly enough, not to cling, not to lead, just to say quietly, I'm here. As they turned down a narrow street, a sudden gust sent her wet hair clinging to her cheek. Julian reached out slowly, gently brushing a strand behind her ear. His fingertips grazed her cold skin. Just a simple gesture, but it made her chest tighten. Ava looked up at him, and their eyes met, unflinching, unguarded. In his gaze, she no longer saw the man who once offered money for her presence. There was no arrogance left, no sense of ownership, only honesty, an unspoken apology, and a fragile love that was just beginning to bloom again. Real, quiet, trembling, but true. She spoke, her voice almost lost beneath the rain. "I'm not making any promises, but I'll walk with you for a while." Julian didn't answer. He only looked at her and gently tightened his hold on her hand. Not to keep her, just to say, "That's enough." They kept walking, not fast, not toward any particular place. The rain continued falling, soaking their hair and shoulders, but Ava no longer felt cold. For the first time in months, she felt light, as if the burden she had carried had been laid down. Not because someone took it away, but because she finally chose to believe again. Not in promises, not in perfection, but in the quiet truth that someone can change if they truly want to protect not just a person, but the chance to begin again.